I got into hip hop, I mean, definitely when I was growing up in New York. You know, it was in the 90s, and I think it was at the point where hip hop had kind of already crossed over to some extent into pop, and you know, that's just what you listen to. I mean, Biggie, and you know, even I remember No Way Out. You know, when I was growing up, I was like really into that album, and you know, like Biggie, Pac, you know, just kind of like the rappers that were really big at the time. The way things kind of shook out, I saw this opening to write about music, about the business of music for Forbes. And you know, it was kind of this great marriage of two different things that I'm pretty passionate about. An editor came over to me and she said, "Hey, you know, you're one of the only people here under 30. Would you be interested in helping me put together the first ever Forbes hip hop top earners package?" We hadn't come up with the name Cash Kings yet, and so I said, "Yeah, you know, why would I ever turn that down?" And I ended up helping her put together the package, and I wrote the story for the magazine about how much Tupac was earning at the time. You know, and back then he was still earning as much as pretty much any but 5 living rappers. And so I wrote this magazine story, and on the sidebar we put, you know, the top 5 living earners in hip hop, and the top 3 of those were Jay-Z, 50 Cent, and Diddy. And when that story went out, the Forbes 1, 2, 3 I Get Money remix was released by the 3 of them, and I just remember it kind of burning up the airwaves in New York and hearing it on the radio and thinking like, wow, I had something to do with that. That's kind of like bringing a new element of credibility to business journalism. You know, we all felt a lot cooler over here, and we were playing it in the office and stuff. For artists that make a lot of money off of touring or record sales, like Kanye West, for example, you know, that's relatively straightforward. We have databases, Polestar, we have access there. You know, there are databases out there that tell you how much every artist grosses on how many shows over, you know, how many, whatever period of time. There are calculations, standard calculations that we do, same way as Billboard does when they put together their lists in determining an artist's take-home pay. You know, industry kind of standard for merch sales, and we kind of multiply the average, you know, merch sales by the crowd, that kind of thing. It's all pretty straightforward. Album sales, you know, we get from RIAA and Nielsen SoundScan when we can. You know, so that's pretty easy. Of course, like, you know, there are a range of deals in the music business, and sometimes somebody gets an advance that, you know, it's hard sometimes to figure out what the advance is, but you know, but usually, you know, after 5 years of doing it, I can find out from, you know, a bunch of different sources. And, of course, like the actual royalty rates sometimes different, but they're in the same range, so you can have a pretty good idea of what an artist makes off recorded music. You know, then when it comes to these outside deals, it's about, you know, kind of talking to the people on background, off the record, you know, talking to executives, talking to managers, talking to the artists themselves, getting them to kind of cough up some of the details. Birdman, you know, always quibbles with our valuations, but we have a good relationship, and we go back and forth, and you know, and you know, Birdman is one guy who's willing to work with us and, you know, kind of point us in the directions of some of his different ventures. So you know, I think there's always a matter of, you know, what do you look at for different artists, and what do they tell you? You know, what do you know from having covered it for a while, and you know, and how do you create the kind of, you know, the midpoint, you know, that sounds right. I would keep an eye on Wale and J. Cole, who barely missed the list. They both made right around $5 million last year, and that was just shy of enough to make the list. Both had like very solid albums. Both toured a fair amount. You know, the question is, can you make it, you know, into that kind of arena headlining stratosphere? You know, somebody like Wiz Khalifa, I think, could do that, and he was, I think, 11 or 12. He was on the cusp. Wiz Khalifa is somebody who I definitely think could be in the top 10 next year, because I think his star has risen so much, you know, that he could be a viable, you know, big touring act. And he makes a lot of money on merch too, which I think a lot of people don't know. Hip-hop artists typically don't make that much on merch, but he has such an identity, you know, as Wiz Khalifa the pothead, and he sells Wiz Khalifa branded rolling papers and shirts and like, you know, pot grinders and stuff like that. So he definitely, you know, he cleans up some extra on that. But I think one guy who I would really keep an eye on, who he's not young, but I think a lot of people don't realize how much money he makes and how business savvy he is Tech-9. He's been cleaning up. He does hundreds of shows a year. He puts out multiple albums. He owns half of his own record label. They do all the merch in-house. You know, it's quite an operation that they've got going there. And you know, I think if he gets even just a little more kind of mainstream popularity, his work ethic combined with his business smarts, you know, could easily push him into the top 10. I think it was Steve Stout who said, you know, we were talking about who would be the first hip-hop billionaire, and I said, well, pretty clearly it'll be Puff or Jay, and he said, well, maybe, but you know, in a world where Instagram can sell for $1 billion, I wouldn't put it past a guy like Kanye, you know, somebody like that, to come up with a really brilliant idea that gets turned into a company that gets sold for $1 billion really quickly. So, you know, it's I would say in terms of, you know, total wealth, Jay and Diddy are the closest, certainly, to in the race to $1 billion. But you know, could be Kanye, could be Dre with Beats, who was actually the first one across the finish line.